Jed Carter had always believed that life on the open land was simple. Hard. Yes. Demanding. Yes. But simple. Every morning, he woke up before the sun, put on his worn boots, and walked out to the corral where his horse, Dustfoot, waited for him. The horse always greeted him with a soft sound, as if he was saying, "I'm ready." For Jed, that sound was the start of every good day. Dustfoot was not just any horse. He was a strong Mustang with a dark brown coat and a white mark on his forehead that looked like a tiny cloud. Jed had found him years ago, when he was only a young colt. The little horse had been nervous and shy, but Jed had taken care of him with patience. Over time, Dustfoot learned to trust him completely. This bond grew so strong that some of the ranch hands joked that Dustfoot could probably understand English better than a few of them. Jed worked on a large ranch far out in the American Southwest. The land stretched wide and empty, with long plains, rocky hills, and dry riverbeds that only filled after a rare rainfall. The sun was often harsh, and the nights could become cold enough to make a man shiver, even under a thick blanket. But Jed felt at home there. He liked the silence, the smell of dry grass, and the peaceful sound of the wind moving across the land. One morning, after a long week of cattle work, Jed felt more tired than usual. The cattle had been restless all week because of the shifting weather. Dustfoot had run many miles across the plains, helping Jed guide the herd. By the time the work was done, man and horse were both exhausted. Jed brushed Dustfoot slowly, speaking softly to him, telling him he had done well. The horse pressed his head gently against Jed's shoulder, a small gesture that always made Jed smile. As the sun set behind the hills, Jed made sure Dustfoot had water and hay. He locked the corral gate securely, as he did every night. The ranch was a quiet place, and nothing unusual ever happened there. Jed walked back to the bunkhouse, ate a simple meal, and went to bed early. He expected the next day to be peaceful, a rare day with no cattle to manage and no heavy work waiting. But things didn't happen as he expected. When Jed woke up at dawn, the sky was still a soft gray. The birds had just begun to make their morning sounds. He stretched, pulled on his boots, and walked out toward the corral with the same calm feeling he had every morning. But when he reached the fence, something felt wrong. Dustfoot was not there. At first, Jed blinked a few times, thinking maybe he was just too sleepy to see properly. The corral was empty. Not a single hoofprint inside. No movement. No soft morning sound from his horse, just silence. Jed leaned both hands on the fence and took a long breath. "Dustfoot?" he called, expecting the horse to appear from behind the water trough, or maybe from the small shelter inside the corral, but no sound came back. The worry in his chest grew heavy. He checked the gate. It was open. Not broken. Not damaged, just open. Jed remembered closing it carefully the night before. He was sure of it. Dustfoot was clever, but not clever enough to lift a latch by himself. Something must have happened. Jed walked around the corral slowly, checking the ground. The dirt was soft in some places because of the morning dew. He knelt down and examined the footprints. Dustfoot's tracks were clear. They led away from the corral, toward the small trail behind the ranch, the one that stretched toward the dry riverbed. "Why would he go that way?" Jed murmured. Dustfoot never wandered far. Even when he was let loose in the open land, he always stayed close. Jed stood up and looked toward the horizon, trying to spot the horse's figure in the distance. The plains were empty. Jed hurried to saddle another ranch horse, an older animal named Copper, and rode out following the tracks. The morning sun was rising, spreading light across the land. Jed's heart beat faster with every step Copper took. He kept thinking about Dustfoot. Was he hurt? Did someone take him? Had he run away for some unknown reason? He followed the hoofprints for nearly an hour. They led across dusty ground, past low bushes, and toward the riverbed. The riverbed was dry most of the year, only filling with water during storms. It was a lonely place, with cracked earth and scattered rocks. When Jed reached the edge, he saw Dustfoot's tracks continue along the riverbed for some distance. But then they faded. The wind had blown sand over the ground, covering the rest of the prints. Jed dismounted and walked on foot for a while, searching carefully. He even knelt to touch the dry soil, hoping to feel something. But there was nothing. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. He stood there quietly, listening to the empty land. All he heard was the sharp call of a distant bird and the soft rustling of dry grass. The world around him felt huge and empty. He had never felt so unsure. Jed spent several hours searching. He rode south, then east, then north again. He checked every place Dustfoot liked to explore. He called out his name again and again, but there was no answer, not even an echo. By noon, the sun was high and hot. Jed wiped sweat from his forehead and looked out at the land. The worry inside him had grown into a tight knot. Dustfoot wasn't just a horse to him. He was a friend. Losing him felt like losing a part of himself. Jed rode back to the ranch slowly, feeling defeated. A few ranch hands asked if he had found Dustfoot, but he could only shake his head. They tried to comfort him, saying the horse would turn up eventually, but Jed didn't feel reassured. He spent the rest of the day checking the corral again, walking the nearby paths, and asking anyone who passed if they had seen a Mustang wandering alone. But no one had seen anything unusual. When the sun began to set, the sky turned a warm orange. Jed stood at the edge of the corral, his hands resting on the fence. He stared at the open land, thinking about Dustfoot. The air felt heavy and still. The silence felt deeper than usual. He knew Dustfoot was strong. He knew the horse was smart. But the land was wide, and the night could be cold. The thought of Dustfoot out there alone made Jed's chest tighten. That night, Jed couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling. Every sound outside made him sit up, hoping it was the horse returning. But it never was. Each passing hour felt longer than the last. He kept replaying the day, in his mind Dustfoot missing, the open gate, the tracks that ended at the riverbed. Something didn't feel right. He felt a strange intuition deep in his chest, as if something big was about to happen, something he could not yet understand. Jed didn't know that the next morning would bring a surprise so unexpected, so unbelievable, that it would stay with him for the rest of his life. He didn't know that Dustfoot would return, and he definitely didn't know who would be riding on his back. The next morning began quietly, just like every other day on the ranch. A soft, cool breeze moved across the plains, and the early light painted the sky in shades of pink and yellow. But for Jed, the morning did not feel peaceful at all. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Dustfoot wandering somewhere alone in the wide land. The worry stayed with him through the night, like a weight on his chest. Jed got up before the others, hoping he could start searching again while the air was still cool. He washed his face with cold water from a metal basin and stepped outside. The ground felt slightly damp with morning dew. The world was quiet, almost too quiet. Jed walked toward the corral, not expecting anything, only hoping for a small sign, maybe a fresh hoofprint, or a bit of Dustfoot's hair stuck to the fence. But before he reached the corral, he heard something. It was faint at first, like a soft heartbeat coming through the still morning air. Then it grew clearer. Hoofbeats. Jed froze. His breath caught in his throat. Hoofbeats at dawn could mean anything: a ranch horse, a stray animal, maybe a rider passing by. But Jed felt something deep inside him, a feeling that made his heart race. He turned toward the open plains and waited, listening carefully. The sound was steady, coming closer. Jed stepped forward, eyes fixed on the horizon, and then he saw a shape. At first it was only a small shadow in the distance, moving slowly. But as it approached, the shape became clearer. A horse. A strong, familiar form. The dark coat. The proud head. The steady, confident trot. It was Dustfoot. Jed felt his chest fill with relief so strong that for a moment he couldn't even move. His hands shook slightly as he stepped closer. "Dustfoot," he whispered, almost afraid to believe what he was seeing. But as the horse came nearer, Jed's relief slowly turned into surprise, then into shock. Dustfoot was not alone. Riding on his back was a young woman. Her skin was warm in tone, her long dark hair hanging loosely around her shoulders. She wore simple clothing made for travel, but she looked tired, as if she had been moving through the night without rest. Her posture was weak, her hands barely holding the reins. Jed had never seen her before in his life. For a moment, he could only stand there staring, unable to understand what he was seeing. Dustfoot walked calmly, almost protectively, as if he knew the rider needed help. Jed's heart beat so hard that he could feel it in his throat. Several ranch hands, hearing the approaching hoofbeats, came out of the barn and stopped alongside him. They whispered among themselves, "Who is she? Where'd she come from? How'd she end up on Jed's horse?" Jed didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on Dustfoot and the mysterious rider. When Dustfoot finally reached the corral, he slowed down and stopped right in front of Jed. The woman lifted her head weakly, eyes half open. Her face showed exhaustion, but there was also calmness, as if she trusted where Dustfoot had brought her. Jed stepped forward carefully. "Ma'am," he said softly, "are you all right?" The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips moved slightly, but the words didn't form. Then her eyes slowly rolled downward, and her body tilted to the side. "Watch out!" one of the ranch hands called, but Jed was already moving. He reached up and caught her gently before she could fall from the saddle. She was light, her breathing slow and unsteady. Jed held her carefully, trying not to startle her if she woke. Dustfoot stood still, watching Jed with calm eyes, as if he knew Jed would take care of her. Jed lifted the woman in his arms and looked at the ranch owner, Mr. Hanley, who had just stepped outside with a surprised expression. "She needs rest," Jed said quickly. "She's worn out." Mr. Hanley frowned and walked closer. "Jed, we don't know who she is. You can't just bring anyone inside. There might be trouble." Jed shook his head firmly. "She's tired. Dustfoot brought her here. That's enough reason for me." The ranch owner looked at the woman again, his expression softening. "All right," he finally said. "But let's keep everything calm." Jed nodded and carried the woman gently into the bunkhouse. He laid her on his own bed because it was the nearest and most comfortable place. The room smelled of clean laundry and wood. Sunlight streamed in through the small window. He placed a folded blanket under her head and stepped outside to bring water. When he returned, he sat beside her and dipped a cloth into the water, gently touching it to her forehead. Her skin felt warm, not from fever but from exhaustion. The woman shifted slightly in her sleep, but her breathing remained soft and slow. The other ranch hands stood near the doorway, whispering among themselves. Jed heard bits of conversation. "Where do you think she came from? Maybe she got lost. Or maybe she needed help, and Dustfoot knew it." Jed didn't know the answer. But deep inside, he felt something unusual. Something important had happened, even if he didn't understand it yet. After a while, the ranch hands went back to their work, leaving Jed alone with the woman. He stayed quietly beside her, watching to make sure she was resting well. Dustfoot stood outside the bunkhouse, calm and peaceful, as if he knew his job was done. Jed reached out and patted the horse's neck. "You did something special, boy," he whispered. Dustfoot lowered his head and closed his eyes, enjoying the gentle touch. Hours passed slowly. The sun rose higher, warming the land. Jed stayed near the woman, making sure she had water whenever she stirred. She looked peaceful when she slept, but every time she woke, even a little, Jed could see the tiredness in her eyes. Finally, when the sun began to soften again in the late afternoon, she opened her eyes fully for the first time. She blinked slowly, trying to understand where she was. Jed sat forward, careful not to startle her. "You're safe," he said gently. "You're on a ranch. Dustfoot brought you here." She looked at him quietly, her expression soft but guarded. She tried to speak but stopped to swallow. Her voice came out low and tired. "Your horse. He brought me here?" Jed smiled softly. "He must have known you needed help." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes filling with emotion, not fear, but relief. I thank you, she said, each word slow but clear. You don't have to thank me, Jed replied. Just rest. When you're ready, we can talk. She closed her eyes again, but not in sleep, this time in calmness. She whispered a soft word that sounded like her name, but Jed couldn't hear it clearly. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her gently. Dustfoot had brought her to him. A strange woman, tired and alone. Why? How had she found his horse? What had she been through? Jed felt a growing curiosity mixed with a quiet respect. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew it would matter. And he knew that their paths had crossed for a reason he didn't fully understand. He only knew one thing for certain. The next part of his life was about to become very different. The sun had almost reached its highest point when the young woman finally gathered enough strength to sit up on the bed. Jed noticed her movement instantly. He had been sitting on a wooden chair near the window, watching the quiet land outside while keeping an ear open for any sound from her. When he heard the soft rustle of the blanket, he turned his head and saw her sitting up slowly, using the bedpost for support. Jed stood up gently. "Take your time," he said softly. "You've been resting for hours." The woman nodded, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders. She didn't look afraid, only tired, as if she had carried a heavy weight inside her for a long time. Her eyes were deep and calm, but Jed could see questions in them too. He brought her a cup of water. She accepted it with both hands, drinking slowly as if every sip mattered. When she finished, she placed the cup on the small table beside the bed and looked at Jed with quiet gratitude. "My name is Jed Carter," he said, hoping to make her feel more at ease. "You're safe here. This is a ranch. Dustfoot, my horse, brought you to us." The woman lowered her eyes for a moment and then raised them again, as if gathering her courage. "My name is Tala," she said softly. I am from the Apache people. I live with my family not far from here." Jed nodded. He had heard of small Apache communities living in the region, usually peaceful and close to nature. He had never met anyone from those families personally, but he had always respected them. "I'm glad Dustfoot found you," Jed said gently. "Were you traveling alone?" Tala looked down at her hands resting on her lap. Her fingers played nervously with the edge of the blanket. Jed could sense she was choosing her words carefully. "I was not alone at first," she said slowly. "My family was moving across the land. We often travel from one place to another. But something unexpected happened, and I had to leave quickly. I didn't know where to go. I was tired, and my feet were hurting. I needed to find help." Jed listened closely. He didn't interrupt her. He waited patiently, letting her speak at her own pace. Tala continued. "I walked for a long time. The land was quiet, and I didn't know if I was heading the right way. The sky was already turning dark. I was afraid of getting lost in the night. Then I heard a sound, a horse walking nearby." Jed leaned forward slightly. "Dustfoot?" She nodded. "Yes. At first, I thought he belonged to someone close by. But he was alone. He came toward me slowly, as if he understood I needed him." She paused, remembering. He lowered his head near me. I placed my hand on him, and he didn't move away. Jed's chest warmed with pride, but he stayed quiet. Tala continued, her voice softer. "I climbed onto his back because I had no strength left to walk. And he began moving. Not wildly, not in fear. Calmly, as if he already knew where he was going." Jed smiled. "Dustfoot has always had good instincts. Better than most people I know." Tala allowed a tiny smile to appear on her face. It felt as if he was guiding me. I don't know how, but he stayed on a steady path. Through the night, he walked without stopping too much, even though I was weak. When I woke up again, he was bringing me here. Jed felt a deep respect for both Tala and Dustfoot. Tala had trusted an unknown horse in the middle of the night, and Dustfoot had somehow known she needed help. "Thank you for helping me," Tala said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "You didn't know me, yet you gave me shelter." "You don't need to thank me," Jed replied softly. "Anyone would have helped." Tala shook her head gently. "Not everyone helps a stranger. I am grateful. Jed didn't know what to say to that. He simply nodded and offered her more water, which she accepted. As the hours passed, Tala grew stronger. She ate a warm meal the cook had prepared for her and took small steps outside to breathe the fresh air. Jed walked beside her in case she felt dizzy. Dustfoot stood nearby, watching her closely, almost as if he remembered that she had been in his care. Tala placed her hand on Dustfoot's neck and smiled. He is very special, she said. Jed chuckled. I've been telling people that for years. They never believed me. They both laughed quietly. It was the first time Jed had seen her truly relax. After some time, they sat on a wooden bench facing the open land. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of dry grass. Tala closed her eyes and let the breeze touch her face. I want to tell you the full truth, she said suddenly. Jed looked at her, surprised by her serious tone. Only if you want to. She nodded. I do. You helped me. You should know everything. She took a slow breath, preparing her thoughts. For many days, my family has been traveling peacefully. We follow our usual paths through the land, visiting places that are important to us. But lately, we felt uneasy. We sensed that something was not right. We didn't know what it was, but the feeling grew stronger. Jed listened carefully. Tala's voice was steady but gentle. One morning, when we were resting, I went to gather berries and water from a small stream. I wasn't far from my family's camp, but while I was picking berries, I heard a strange sound, like someone moving through the bushes. Jed noticed she paused, not in fear, but to keep her words calm and simple. When I returned to my family, she continued softly, they told me they thought it would be safer if I stayed a little away from the camp for some time. They believed there were travelers nearby who might be passing through. It wasn't anything dangerous, just something uncertain. So I left quietly to avoid any misunderstanding. Jed nodded. Her family had made a careful, wise choice. I walked toward the open land, hoping to return later, Tala said, but the day grew long, and I became tired. The land is big, and it's easy to feel lost. I kept going, trying to reach a familiar place. That's when I found Dustfoot. Jed realized something important. Tala wasn't running from anything harmful. She simply needed a safe place to rest and find her way back. You did the right thing trusting Dustfoot, Jed said kindly. He trusted me first, Tala replied. Jed felt that her words were true. Dustfoot had always had a way of sensing things that others couldn't. As the afternoon slowly turned into evening, the light became golden. Tala and Jed continued talking. She told him stories about her people, how they respected the land, how they moved with the seasons, how they believed everything in nature had a purpose. Jed found her stories calming, like listening to the soft rhythm of wind. In return, Jed told her about ranch life, herding cattle, repairing fences, training horses. Tala listened with interest, especially when Jed spoke about Dustfoot as a young colt. He used to spill water from his own bucket just to splash his hooves, Jed said, laughing. Drove me crazy, Tala laughed softly. He still has a playful heart. For a moment, the world felt peaceful and simple. Two people from different backgrounds, sitting together, talking like old friends. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, Tala looked toward the horizon thoughtfully. I want to go back to my family, she said gently. They will worry if I stay away too long. Jed understood. I'll help you get home, he said without hesitation. Tala turned to him, surprised. You would do that? Of course, Jed replied. Dustfoot already brought you this far. We'll make sure you reach your family safely. Tala smiled. A warm, grateful smile that felt like the soft glow of sunset. Jed didn't know exactly what their journey would bring, but he felt sure of one thing. Helping Tala felt right, and Dustfoot, standing quietly nearby, seemed to agree. The morning of their journey arrived quietly. A soft golden light spread across the ranch as the sun rose behind the hills. Birds were beginning their daily songs, and the air felt cool and fresh. Jed woke early, feeling a mix of calmness and purpose. He knew that helping Tala return to her family was the right thing to do. Dustfoot stood in the corral, already awake, as if he knew a journey was coming. Tala stepped out of the bunkhouse with steady steps. Her face looked brighter now, filled with strength that rest had restored. Her long hair moved gently in the breeze. When she saw Dustfoot and Jed preparing for travel, she smiled. "You woke early," Jed said kindly. "So did you," she replied with a light laugh. Jed gathered a small bag of supplies, water, dried food, a blanket, and a map. He didn't know how long the journey would take, but he wanted to be prepared. Tala carried a small pouch of her own, tied with a thin cord. She held it with care, as if it contained something meaningful. Dustfoot lifted his head when they approached. Jed ran his hand down the horse's neck. "Ready for another adventure, boy?" he asked softly. Dustfoot nudged Jed's shoulder gently, which made Tala smile. It seemed the horse was just as eager to help as they were. With everything prepared, Jed helped Tala onto Dustfoot's back. This time she sat firmly, no longer weak or tired. Then Jed swung himself onto Copper, the ranch's older and dependable horse. The ranch hands watched them from a distance, curious but respectful. Mr. Hanley lifted his hand in farewell. "Travel safe," he called. "We will," Jed answered. The two horses moved forward slowly at first, then found a steady rhythm as they left the ranch behind. The land stretched wide ahead of them, rolling grass, low hills, scattered bushes, and the long line of sky meeting the earth. The air was calm, and everything felt peaceful. As they traveled, Tala pointed out familiar areas. "My family often rests near those trees," she said softly, indicating a small cluster of cottonwoods. "We believe the shade there is good for gathering thoughts." Jed enjoyed listening to her. She spoke with respect for the land, noticing details that most people overlooked. She pointed out the direction of the soft wind, the marks of animals on the ground, and small plants with special uses. Jed felt like he was learning something new with each passing mile. "You know this land well," Jed said. Tala nodded. "My family teaches us to understand the earth around us. Everything speaks in its own way." Jed looked around. "I guess the land has been speaking to me too. But I never knew how to listen properly." Tala smiled gently. "You listen better than you think." They continued on, following paths Tala recognized. At times they rode in silence, simply enjoying the calm surroundings. Other times, they talked softly about their lives. Tala asked Jed about ranch work. He told her about the long days, the cows that wandered too far, and the storms that sometimes surprised them. He talked about Dustfoot as a young colt, stubborn and full of energy. "He once splashed water all over me during a very cold morning," Jed said, laughing. Tala laughed too. "He has a kind spirit. But he also likes to play." Jed nodded. "You see that in him too, huh?" She nodded again, smiling. In return, Tala spoke about her people, their gatherings, songs, and journeys across the land. She described how they respected the seasons and believed that each day carried its own lesson. Jed listened with interest, fascinated by her calm wisdom. "What does today teach us?" Jed asked playfully. Tala looked thoughtfully at the sky. "Today teaches us that even strangers can walk the same path when kindness leads the way." "I devidon." Jed felt her words settle warmly in his heart. By midday, they stopped near a small stream. The water was clear, dancing lightly over smooth stones. Dustfoot and Copper drank eagerly while Jed and Tala sat beneath a spreading tree. "Tala," Jed asked gently, "do you think your family is close?" She looked around thoughtfully. "Yes, I recognize this place. They should be not far from here." They rested for a short while, then continued their journey. The land slowly changed as they rode farther. Trees became larger, the ground greener, and the air cooler. Tala looked more hopeful with every step, as if each familiar sight brought her closer to home. As the sun began its slow descent, they reached the top of a small hill. Tala paused and looked ahead. Her eyes grew bright. "There," she whispered. Down below, in an open area surrounded by tall trees, several small shelters made from natural materials stood neatly arranged. Smoke rose gently from one of the cooking fires. People moved peacefully between the shelters, tending to daily tasks. Jed watched Tala closely. Her breath caught for a moment, and then she smiled a warm, relieved smile full of gratitude and joy. "My family," she said softly. Jed felt a wave of relief, too. They had reached the place they were searching for. They rode down the hill slowly. As they approached, a few members of Tala's family noticed them and stood up, their faces filled with surprise, then recognition, and finally happiness, as they saw Tala sitting safely on Dustfoot's back. Tala's mother reached her first. She walked toward them with calm steps, but Jed could see the emotion in her eyes. Tala slid down from Dustfoot and embraced her mother tightly. It was a peaceful reunion, gentle, full of love, and free of any harshness. Jed felt his chest warm at the sight. Dustfoot lowered his head politely, as if greeting them, too. Tala's family thanked Jed warmly. Her mother placed a hand on her heart and then gently touched Jed's shoulder, a gesture of sincere gratitude. Jed nodded respectfully, feeling honored. A few of the family members invited Jed to join them for a simple meal. Tala stood beside him, encouraging him with a nod. They shared warm bread, fresh berries, and calming tea. The atmosphere was peaceful, filled with soft conversations and quiet smiles. Tala sat near Jed. "My family is grateful," she said. "And so am I." "I'm glad you're home," Jed replied. "You're safe now." Tala looked at Dustfoot. "Your horse was the one who guided me. Without him, I might still be lost." Jed smiled proudly. He always had a strong heart. As sunset painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Tala's family gathered to thank Jed again. They told him he was welcome to visit whenever he wished. Their kindness moved him deeply, but Jed knew it was time to return to the ranch. He stood, patted Dustfoot, and prepared to leave. Tala stepped closer to him. "Jed," she said softly, "I will not forget your kindness. You didn't know me, but you helped me as if we were old friends." Jed smiled. "Maybe that's what we are now." Tala nodded, her eyes warm. "Yes, friends." Their farewell was peaceful. Jed climbed onto Copper, and Dustfoot walked proudly at his side. Tala and her family watched as he rode up the hill. When Jed reached the top, he looked back one last time. Tala lifted her hand in a gentle wave. Jed returned the gesture with a quiet smile. The ride back to the ranch was calm. The sky slowly darkened, and the stars began to appear. Dustfoot walked beside him, steady and strong, as if proud of the journey they had taken together. When they reached the ranch, Jed felt fulfilled. He had helped someone find their way home. And Dustfoot, his loyal companion, had shown once again that some animals understand more than people realize. In the days that followed, the story of Dustfoot returning with a stranger on his back spread across the nearby ranches. People talked about it with amazement. Some said Dustfoot had a rare instinct. Others said it was simply a special connection between a cowboy and his horse. For Jed, it was more than a story. It was a reminder that life sometimes brings unexpected paths and new friendships. And that, even in the quietest corners of the world, something meaningful can happen when kindness leads the way. Dustfoot became somewhat of a legend around the ranch. But to Jed, he was still the same loyal friend who had shared many journeys and would share many more. And somewhere beyond the hills, Tala lived peacefully with her family, carrying with her the memory of the horse who guided her and the cowboy who helped her find her way home.